going to give you a glimpse of the future, and I'm going to start with what's been happening in the last decade in this amazing world of technology. And then I'm going to work around to what it means for the relationships amongst us and our relationships with the planet. So here's what's been happening in just 10 years, a bit more than 10 years. So that block in the middle shows you how we have built up to where we are. PCs, internet, smartphones, these basic platforms allowed us to do shopping, search, and social media. While all that was going on, over on the right, there was huge amounts of research and development into machine learning algorithms, mathematicians, my kind of people doing that sort of research. And there were people building graphics processors for games consoles. All of that came together in one particular time in 2010. Massive amounts of data, very cheap processing, and the smart algorithms. You can actually date the machine learning explosion to 2012. A competition began in 2010 called ImageNet. This invited teams of computer programmers to compete, to analyze images, and to categorize them: giraffes, strawberries, houses, whatever. In 2011, the error rate was 25%. In 2012, in October, it dropped to 15%. That kind of drop was very, very interesting. The industry exploded. By 2015, the error rate was down at about 3 or 4%. That's as good as humans can do. And so you've got the third line there: image analysis, natural language processing, sensors everywhere, and a thing that I've put on there called digital twins, making computer models of everything from bridges to human bodies, experimenting with the digital models before you start changing the physical world. And where's that headed? It's headed to that fourth line down: autonomous vehicles, autonomous services, and autonomous factories. This is an enormously big deal. It doesn't matter much if your Netflix algorithm gives you a movie to watch that you don't like. It does matter a huge amount if your autonomous vehicle, your self-driving car, runs into a lamppost. Getting that right, getting autonomous vehicles right, and other autonomous services right, will solve many, many outstanding problems in AI. You should watch autonomous vehicles. If those problems get cracked, there will be a massive wave of change coming out into the economy. And where will it leave us? It'll leave us what I got on the bottom line there: digital immersion, sensors everywhere. There'll be a sensor up here. When you get back to your room, you'll be able to say, what the hell was Howard talking about 5 minutes in? And it will tell you. Deep surveillance. We have the ability to do deep surveillance now. We're doing it. It will just go on getting deeper and deeper, and how we control that is a fundamental problem for humanity. And lastly, adaptive AI. A dog is an adaptive AI. You can teach it something over here, and it'll go and do the same thing over there. By 2050, the betting is we'll have dog-level adaptive AI. Many more technologies being rolled out. I've put 5G and blockchain, a few other things on there. And in the lab at the moment, but coming out, quantum computing and direct interfaces between brains and computers. And I'll say a bit about that, if I can move on. So this has created an immense amount of value. Here are some of the big tech platforms. If you look along the top, you'll see different sectors of the digital economy. Now, it's color-coded. The green companies are US companies. The light blue companies are Chinese companies. The one dark blue company you see is another Asian, non-Chinese Asian company. And the yellow is a European company. As it happens, it's a bank, ING. It's been transforming itself to a digital platform. But at the level of the companies shown on the screen, value of $40 billion, there are no other European companies across those sectors of the tech economy. Europe's out of this game. This game is a Chinese and US game. Down about the middle, you'll see Tencent and Alibaba. and they go right across the chart. The point about that, each of them has about 500 million customers. They are getting data on everything those customers do. They have the richest, the richest data of any companies or governments in the world. That brings me to what China has been doing, and this is all in just about in a decade. So let me just take you through the chronology of China. 2008, it sets up a great wall to wall off its internet from the rest of the world. 2011, Tencent brought out the WeChat, a super app that lets you do anything online, from ordering airline tickets to having a consultation with a doctor. President Xi comes into power 2012, and 1 year later announces the Belt and Road Initiative. This is $1 trillion investment program, maybe more than $1 trillion, in infrastructure, ports, harbors, railways, you name it. It will join up 70-odd countries with half the world's population, half the world's economic output. And it's now one of the main engines of growth in the developing world, certainly in Eurasia. While doing all these great things for development, it's important to look after the people. A social credit plan was introduced. You are given a social credit score. If you do good things, your credit score goes up. If you do bad things, your credit score goes down. If you've got a high credit score, you can take a high-speed train and live in a nice apartment. If you've got a low credit score, you can't. As of last year, 25 million people had low credit scores. They were credit impaired. This is being judged more and more by algorithms. Algorithmic social control is how you look after a 1.3 billion population. It goes along with a biometric database. There's a database of everybody's DNA, voice patterns, iris patterns, fingerprints, and so on. An interesting way of managing a very large country. So, 2015 Made in China 2025 was announced. This is to make sure that China has everything it needs to be right at the forefront of all technologies right across the economy. 2015, Tencent and Alibaba decided that mobile payments were the thing to do. So they said to the merchants right across China, we'll give you the equipment you need, and we won't charge you for making transactions. And the merchants said, well, we don't mind doing that. China flipped from a cash economy to a cashless economy in 2 years. There's a picture up there of a beggar holding up a QR code, a two-dimensional barcode. In China, you can pay the beggar just with your mobile phone because there's no cost of doing it. 2016 was an epiphany. DeepMind, a company owned by Google that was created in the UK, created a machine learning algorithm that could play the game of Go. It beat Lee Sedol, the South Korean Go champion. Go is a game which is fundamental to Chinese culture, 2,500 years old. Here was a little company from London going right into the heart of Chinese culture and beating the world champion. China woke up at that moment and announced a year later the national AI plan to dominate AI and big data by 2030. If you ask how far they've got, the answer is, in some sectors, face recognition, they are already leading the world. Well, where's all that led? That's led to where we are now, a trade war that's turning into a tech war. Let me just show you that, if I can. Yeah. So here's the new world order as it seems to me. On the right, there's the US. It's got a strategy called Make America Great Again. It's about 5% of the world's population. Over on the left is China in green, and then the Belt and Road countries as they were originally conceived in blue and orange. In that circle that you can see there, there's something like 50% of the world's population. Those green blobs on the right are the big US tech platforms. The blue ones are the big Chinese tech platforms. A couple of them I'll just point out on the right. There's Intel and NVIDIA. They are big chip manufacturers. China doesn't have any of those. On the left, there's Huawei, which you will have read about. That's a mobile telecoms infrastructure company, easily the best one in the world. The US and Europe, although they have companies, don't have anything quite like that. Donald Trump is at the moment trying to take Huawei off the playing field. This may be a short-run thing before he flips to a trade agreement, or it may be a long-run thing, in which case there's a full-scale technology war about to begin. That will slow down both sides and have deeply interesting socio-political consequences. It will be a blip on the development of technology, but no more than a blip. China will just draw itself in and replace everything it now gets from the US, and the US will have to do the same for China. Just to give you a sense of where technology is moving in the lab, the picture on the top left is a dog in a doorway. The next picture along on the top is somebody going into an MRI scanner, and they're looking at that picture. The next picture along is the MRI scan. You put the MRI scan through a machine learning algorithm, and you get what it says on the screen, a dog in front of an open door. You can read the pattern of the thought in that person's mind. An MRI scan is a bit too big to bring to a party. The thing on the bottom left now does the same thing. You can put that helmet on. The technology is called warm quantum sensing. That lady can move around, and if she focuses her thoughts, you can read them. The man with this thing here is a researcher from MIT. That thing, when you think deeply about something, you sub-vocalize, your muscles twitch a bit. That picks up muscle twitches. He's playing a game of chess. He's thinking about the move his opponent has made. The muscle twitches are decoded by a machine learning algorithm, fed to a chess playing computer that tells him what to read or what to move next. The next man is he's got something which measures alpha waves in his head. These are very noisy waves. He watched videos for 8 hours. He then went to sleep. A machine learning algorithm analyzed his alpha waves while he was watching the videos, and then played back the next morning his dreams to him in grayscale. It's in the lab. It will move out of the lab. This stuff will spread right across the economy. The top left is Google's self-driving car. If self-driving really takes off, huge problems to solve, but if it does, there will be a community, 50 million or so, of self-driving cars around the world, which will become our urban transport. They'll all be artificial intelligences. They'll all be updated day by day. They will all be talking to one another. R2-D2 is not the immediate future of robotics and artificial intelligence out in the community. That is the future of artificial intelligence in the community. The picture of robots is a factory run by the biggest Japanese robotics manufacturer called Fanuc. It's a Fanuc robot making a Fanuc robot. The lights are on so you can take the picture. When you're not taking pictures, the lights are off because there's no need to have lights on. There's nobody in the factory at all. The fabulous thing about energy is the costs have fallen of solar and batteries around 25% a year. Something that costs $100 falls to $5 after 10 years and to 25 cents after another 10 years. That's the rate of decline. It was thought 10 years ago that you couldn't manage networks with a lot of wind and solar on them because of the intermittency. Because of machine learning algorithms, you now can. They have this wonderful stuff that AI can do has turned up just in time to manage huge networks of intermittent energy. Health is going to be transformed. Defense is going to be transformed. Those drones carry explosive charges. If you want to attack a battleship, you fill a torpedo with drones. The torpedo stops just before the battleship. The drones come out, they go onto the deck, and they just take out one thing after another. There's no defense against that at the moment. Of course, there will be. On China's list of the AI stuff it wants to be a leader in, drone technology is number 2. Security, I mean, that's just a general reference to the cold cyber war that's going on. All major infrastructure around the world is compromised. There's a switch in Beijing and another one in Washington, and by pulling the switch, you can turn the stuff off around the world, is what I guess. The next image is an image of a neural network. These are the things that run machine learning algorithms. In a real neural network, there are maybe 10,000 of those circles and maybe 1 million interconnecting lines. And the question I put to you is, take a look at it. Is it fair? Does it keep your data private? Can it be compromised? And the answer is, of course, nobody knows this. It's a highly technical, mathematical question to figure out whether machine learning algorithms are ethical in a sense that we would understand ethics. Ethics has become a mathematical and computational subject, which some of the things I look at are spending a lot of time working on. Lastly, of food on that slide. So AI and robotics will help drive food productivity and lessen the harm done by agriculture. There will be robots and drones out in fields treating individual plants. That's fabulous. And it will be very helpful. But it won't drive the revolution in food that's needed. The picture there is a hamburger. It's a hamburger that cost $250,000 to produce. It was produced completely artificially. The way you produce it is you scrape the backside of a cow. You put the scraping in a vat. You add serum, and you grow artificial meat. There's a company, it's a Dutch company called Moser Meat, that reckons it will get the cost of an artificial meat hamburger down to $1 a patty by 2030. Of course, lots of Silicon Valley companies are wading into this. There are two lines of attack on this. One is to use different kinds of vegetables to create vegetarian meat that looks and feels like real meat. That's great. It may well take off. I hope it does. But for people who want real meat, that is real meat, that isn't grown in a field but is grown in a vat, that might well take off from the 2030s. The reason, by the way, meat is so important is this. There are something like 30 million square kilometers of pasture land. If you could take the meat out of the land and grow trees, you could draw down about 30 billion tons of carbon dioxide a year. So this is called saving the world by hamburger. You can actually solve global warming if you can get meat out of the fields and into a vat in a factory. That brings me to what we're doing to the biosphere. We're transforming it, of course. So these are indices. The light green is the world's population indexed to 1970 as 100. So up it goes. The dark green is an index of the population of animals. Animals being things with backbones and insects. Both populations, all the populations are falling at around 2% a year. So the green line comes down like that. The red bars are warming. Global warming indexed to now, 2020, and going down as we go back to 1970 and up into the future. And now look over at 1970 where this graph begins, and look over where we are, where we're headed, 2040, 2050, 2060. We used to have a system that ran as it was in 1970. We're heading towards a system that looks like it's going to look in 2050. And there's a big question which deep thinkers are asking. Can you run a world on that kind of operating model? And the answer is a big question mark. Nobody knows if you can run a world on an operating model where stuff is so far out of balance from how it was a century earlier. So, where does that leave my glimpse of the future? Well, it leaves it like this. 2010, 2010's AI being rolled out will transform everything we do in the economy. 2020's, the energy costs have fallen so fast, and they're continuing to fall, that the next decade is the decade at which coal and oil and gas will really start to be eroded, I think. There are huge social forces preventing that, but the economics will overpower them. From the 2030s onwards, you can just see how you could transform agriculture by taking meat out of fields. The 2040s, by the time we get to the 2040s, the Chinese economy will be twice the size of the US economy, something like that. China will dominate Eurasia, which is why I show China on Eurasia. What China does and how we interact with China will be fundamental to the kind of world that we end up with in the 2050s. And there's the 2050s, the environment. Where do we get to? And there are two pictures of this. One picture is we use these fabulous technologies to transform and restore the world. We get warming under control. We get meat under control. We rewild huge expanses of the world. And so we go into something which will be a wonderful state for mankind. And the other picture you know about. We don't do that stuff, and we end up bequeathing to the next couple of generations one huge problem to solve in the 2050s onwards. Now, if you're an entrepreneurial type, you say, well, that's absolutely fine, but what the hell do we do about it? And it's a big problem, so you need leverage to solve it. You need a big lever. You need to pull something to change the picture for the better. So here's the lever. Here's the lever. Here's the lever that I found for myself, anyhow. It's a bunch of lawyers, of all things. It's a firm called Client Earth that was founded 12 years ago by some visionary philanthropists who hired a creative genius of a lawyer called James Thornton. And this is what happened. They said, James, nothing is going on in Europe. There are no environmental law cases being brought. So here's some money. Go get yourself a flat and bring some cases. So he did that. He went to London. The UK was trying to get off coal at the time. He speeded it up by bringing environmental lawsuits against coal plants. It all worked well. He was pushing on an open door. He speeded up coal being phased out in the UK. But then he looked at Poland. Poland is the heart of coal-fired generation in Europe, and he took on Poland. And offices were raided, all the standard stuff. Now, Client Earth is a deep part of the social fabric of Poland, and it is helping Poland make a transition from coal to renewables. It's a fight every day for every coal-fired power plant that's stopped. So far, Client Earth has stopped between 30 and 40, about 36, I think, coal-fired power plants. Each one would have generated 6 million tons of carbon dioxide a year. That's the level at which it's working. Okay, so that's... Oh, for what it's worth, we're now going for Poland's largest coal-fired power plant. It's the third largest coal-fired power plant in the world and the dirtiest in the world. It'll take us a while to get it, but we'll get it. And we're now going into Germany. Let's sort out Germany. We've been invited into Germany. The lots of German business people want us to see if we can sort out Germany. Okay, so coal's going well. Not fast enough, but well. So James then turned his attention to air quality in the UK, which was awful at the time. The UK government was just breaking its own laws on air quality. So he took the UK government to the High Court, to the Supreme Court, 3 times. He whispered in the ear of the environmental minister that if it was a 4th time, it would be contempt of court, and there would be braces applied, and the man would be led away. So that did the trick. The UK has now agreed to ban diesel. Because the UK is still in the EU, the rulings apply to the EU. So we immediately took them all around the EU. The EU is banning diesel. But of course, because of great people like Elon Musk and less great people like Volkswagen, who have shown how badly car companies behave, people are now saying, let's not, if we're banning diesel, let's flip to electric. So I reckon Client Earth and its lawsuits have helped Europe flip to electric. Europe is 30% of the global car fleet. We've probably taken off 5 years from the period it takes 30% of the global car fleet to go electric. Well, that's all fabulous. While we were doing that, the Chinese were watching us. And we got a phone call from a man in China who said, come visit. So we went to visit. And we were taken to the Chinese Supreme Court and said, would you give a seminar for the Chinese Supreme Court? Imagine that happening in the US. So we gave a seminar about how they should apply their environmental laws, which are good, but were not being applied. They said, we like that. We'd like to come and visit you. So 6 Chinese Supreme Court judges came to our office in the East End of London, which is in between a playground and a railway line. And they walked around the office and they just wanted to see where it all happened. Then they said, come and teach us. So we set up a training program for Chinese Supreme Court judges and prosecutors. We needed a good trainer, so we hired a man called Laurent Fabius, who was France's prime minister and now heads its constitutional court. He collected a panel of very senior judges from around the world, and we trained the Chinese prosecutors and judges. Last year, after the training program, they started bringing cases. They brought 50,000 cases. They won 97% of them. 75% of them were against government organizations who needed to clean up their act. So this is China beginning to get the environmental stuff under control. So the Chinese like that, and they said to us, that's all very good. How else can you help us? So we said, the Belt and Road Initiative is $1 trillion program. Why not make it a $1 trillion let's clean up the environment while we go program? Why not impose on countries, not impose, but invite countries whom you're financing to adopt Chinese environmental laws? Let's get proper environmental laws into 70 or 80 countries. China said, well, that's an interesting idea. Why don't you come and sit on the committee that that's been set up to green the Belt and Road? So we're doing that. And they said, well, since you're spending a lot of time here, next year, 2020, we've got the UN Convention on Biodiversity meeting in Beijing. We need a bit of a hand to help us formulate the agenda. Why don't you do that as well? So we said, that's cool, we'll do that. So from a flat in London 12 years ago, because we have a brilliant lawyer at the head and a whole team of brilliant lawyers, we're now advising one of the coming player, if it hasn't already arrived, the big player in Eurasia, on how it might green everything that it's doing across that huge swathe of countries. This is the lever. The reason the lever works is that if you've got the rule of law, Judges just have to follow it. So if you can bring a case, if you're permitted by the way society works to bring a case, the judges just can't avoid the consequences of what the law says. They are forced to rule to clean up the environment. So what we would like to do is use that lever to bend the arc of emissions down in the next 10 years and to get half the world reserved for nature. That's what we're trying to do. There are 100 lawyers trying to do that. It's the most remarkable lever as an entrepreneur I have ever seen in action. To conclude the story, there's a strait called the Torres Strait, which is off southeastern Australia, low-lying islands, ocean rising. The Torres Strait Islanders see their culture being wiped out. A couple of weeks ago, they took the Australian government to the United Nations Committee on Human Rights that rules, or is capable of ruling, against countries for interfering with the human rights of citizens. You won't see us prominently in that, but we are behind that. We're going to make Australia explain to the United Nations why it is not doing more to curb its environmental excesses. So, 100 lawyers, we have 13 million of income. We collaborate with 200 firms around the world. We fund 50 of them. We operate in 25 countries. Don't think of us as an environmental firm. Think of us as Netflix or Google in the early days. We're trying to get the world networked so that law firms all around the world can do what we're doing. We want to export the innovation and the legal technology we have developed. And we really do want to change the world in a decade. Thank you.